This video is going to talk about passing values from one function to another. I'm going to start by reminding you about how we passed values from one function to another in Python. So we start with the function user input. I got two pieces of input from the user, input 1 and input 2. I'm just asking for two different words. And then I call the function sentence. Now, we're going to use some vocabulary that I want you to get used to. In this function sentence, I am saying I am accepting two parameters. So I'm accepting two values, and the two parameters are input 1 and input 2. Those are the two parameters I'm accepting into this function. So then when I call the function, I need to pass these two values in. These are called arguments. So the values I'm passing in are called arguments. The values that are being accepted are called parameters. Why are they called something different? Good question. That's what they're called. Okay, so there are a couple ways to do this. I'm passing input 1 and input 2 as arguments into this function called sentence. Now, when sentence takes in these arguments, they don't have to be called input 1 and input 2. I could call this in1 and in2. But what I'm saying is I'm taking input 1 and passing it into this new variable I'm going to call in1. And I'm going to take input 2 and I'm going to pass it into this new variable I called in2. So here, instead of typing input 1 and input 2, I'm going to say in1 and in2. Okay, if I run this, my first word cow, second word store, the cow went to the store. All right, if I wanted to call this function again within itself, I would pass in1 and in2. This function doesn't know what input 1 and input 2 is. Input 1 and input 2 only exist in the user input function. The only values that exist in this sentence function are these new variables we created, in1 and in2. So when I call sentence, I have to make sure I pass in1 and in2 as my arguments. Okay, Swift has the same idea. There's just one small difference. It's quite a big difference actually, but it's small enough for what we're going to do. So same thing, I've got two functions, get input and sentence. In get input, I am getting two pieces of information. Input 1 is the first word, input 2 is the second word, and then I'm going to call sentence. So the parameters in sentence are going to look a little bit different. In Swift is more particular about what type of variable it's accepting, because the type of variable it's accepting, if we narrow it down to one thing, that takes up way less memory. Let me show you what I mean. I could say as my first parameter, I want to take in something called input 1, and I need to tell the function, this is going to be a string that I'm accepting, because I'm looking for a word. The reason we do this is because then it's only reserving a small amount of memory. In Python, if we just say accept this variable, it could have been an array, it could have been an integer, a double, which requires a lot of decimal places, or a string. And that takes up a lot of memory because Python is saying, all right, I'm ready for anything. So I'm leaving a lot of space for this variable just in case. But in Swift, and in this small program, it's not going to make a difference, but in Swift, we're only accepting this one type. So the program knows I'm only leaving space for this type of variable. I don't need to worry about if it's an array or an integer or a double or a string. It is only of type string. Okay, so input 1 will be a type string, and input 2 will be of type string as well. But remember, well, I'll just keep going. So now that means when I call sentence, the arguments, I need to say, all right, the variable that it's going to be called when it gets into this new function will be input 1. And what variable do I want it to be in that value? That's input 1. Don't forget to unwrap. And input 2 in the new function will take on the user's input 2, unwrapped. All right, so now if I print my sentence, the input 1 went to the input 2. Okay, let's run this. First word, the cow, went to the store, the cow went to the store. Now remember what I did in Python. I changed it a little bit so it wasn't quite so confusing. I changed the parameters to in1 and in2. I can do the exact same thing in Swift. Maybe not quite so confusing. In1 and in2, in1 and in2, and in1 and in2. So now what I'm saying is this new variable I'm going to create is called in1 and in2. For in1, I want to pass the user's input. For in2, I want to pass the user's second input. And now I can use that in this function as a parameter. Okay, if I wanted to call sentence again within itself, just like in Python, in1, this function only knows the value in1, so we have to pass it back into itself, and in2 needs to be passed back into itself. So we're going to have this repeated loop again. The first word is, so it's saying all paths through this function will call itself. That gives us this infinite loop that we don't want, but for this purpose, it's going to work for now. So the cow went to the store over and over and over again, because the function just keeps calling itself. It prints the sentence and then calls the sentence, prints it and calls it. Okay, that's an introduction to just passing a string. Passing integers and passing doubles are similar. Passing an array, if you need to pass an array, look that up. All right, that's all. Go get started.